it's our responsibility to like uphold these things, and not the Central Valley doesn't always get the attention or the merits it deserves.
I'm Amanda Kaminsky, and this is Returning to the River, a podcast from California State Parks focused on watershed stories. This season, we're looking at the San Joaquin River watershed, and today's episode explores what it means to love an underappreciated landscape. I've lived in Merced since 2023, so I'm relatively new to the San Joaquin Valley. Coming from a much wetter and colder place in the Northeast, this region has taken some getting used to. Back in October, I took a trip with my husband and my mom to one of the few state parks in the San Joaquin Valley, Great Valley Grasslands State Park. We wanted to get out there and explore nature, find a nice trail somewhere, maybe see some interesting birds and fish in the river. The park wasn't easy to find, tucked away near the unincorporated community of Stevenson in Merced County. We ended up pulling into a parking lot by a boat launch off of Highway 140. The landscape was vast and brown, with scraggly valley oak trees lining the low, slow-moving San Joaquin River. A couple of fishermen were sitting with folding chairs and coolers on the bank right by the parking lot. We ventured down the only trail in sight, a flat gravel trail along an elevated bank that followed the curves of the river. As we walked, I noticed four things. First was the smell. It was the low season, and the river smelled damp and musty. Second were the mosquitoes. As soon as we approached the riverbank, they came out in force, biting every inch of exposed skin and even through our clothes. Third was the trash. Although it petered out the farther we ventured down the trail, the thick grasses on either side were strewn with bottles, chip bags, and dip cans. Fourth, and I admit it was a distant fourth, was the beauty. As the trail led us up the bank, the river meandered below in wide, graceful curves, lined on both sides with richly textured grasses and yellow bursts of late-blooming goldenrod. It took effort, though, to drown out my other senses enough to really soak in the beauty. We turned back early, feeling itchy and tired and ready for a shower. I wanted to learn how to appreciate this landscape more, to practice holding on to the moments of beauty, and even to learn how to reframe the imperfect parts into something worth caring for. I've always felt like it's easy to appreciate the majestic cliffs of Yosemite or the raw power of the Pacific Ocean, but in this episode, I interview people who see grandeur and beauty in the grasslands, rivers, and even the agricultural fields and modest little creeks of the San Joaquin Valley. I want to see these landscapes through their eyes.
Here we are at the top of Eagle Hill Vista Point on the reserve, and as you look out all around you, you can see how expansive not only the reserve is, but also the grasslands of East Merced County.
This is wetland ecologist Joy Bechet, director of the Merced Vernal Pools and Grassland Reserve. We met by the entrance to the reserve near the UC Merced campus, and she gave me a tour on her new electric ATV. It was a crisp, clear day, and golden fields of dry grasses spread out before us in all directions. It was quiet except for the songs of western meadowlarks and insects. A flock of geese flew by in the distance over nearby Lake Yosemite, a small, man-made reservoir fed by the Merced River that supplies irrigation to Merced County. As part of the larger San Joaquin River watershed, the Merced River eventually flows into the San Joaquin near the George Hatfield State Recreation Area. Unlike state parks, the Merced Vernal Pools and Grassland Reserve is not open to the public. As part of the University of California Natural Reserve System, human presence is tightly restricted in order to protect the fragile ecosystem.
Vernal pools are essentially small seasonal wetlands that develop in winter and spring when shallow depressions in the grasslands fill with rainwater. So they're very much a rainwater-driven, intermittent or fleeting ecosystem on the landscape.
For much of the year, vernal pools are completely dry. When we visited, they were only recognizable as slight divots in the otherwise flat, grassy, golden landscape.
And so there's clues that you need to search for on the landscape, like dry, cracked clay mud or cobbles, in this case, on this property. First, you'd look for these depressional areas on the landscape where you could imagine that rainwater would pool in the winter months. And then you can also look for dry, cracked clay. And if you see really big cracks, that's that clay soil that San Joaquin Valley is known for.
Vernal pools require hard soil that does not absorb water, like the clay hardpan in the San Joaquin Valley, and they can only form on land that has never been disked, meaning it's never been broken up and tilled for agriculture. That's why over 95% of California's vernal pools have disappeared. And when a vernal pool disappears, an entire microecosystem disappears with it.
The reserve is a biodiversity hotspot that's got over 450 species of plants and animals that occur on the reserve, and about 35 of those are endemic to vernal pools, meaning they're only in the vernal pools and nowhere else in the world.
Joy described some of the amazing adaptations of these rare endemic species, like how some of the plants have evolved to taste sour as a defense mechanism against grazing animals like deer and elk. They're also sticky and glandular so that they don't dry out in the hot summer. I loved hearing Joy talk about these small details throughout the landscape. Her passion was infectious. She noticed everything and delighted in everything, even things normally considered a nuisance, like ground squirrels and their burrows.
They're really special in that they're a keystone species. They create a lot of the mammal burrowing that you'll see, which is these network of all these holes in the ground with little mounded areas. And they're the ones that are creating habitat for a lot of other animals that live out here in the grasslands. Because grasslands have no shrubs or trees to speak of, the only place to take shelter from predators overhead or, say, the cold, rainy day is to go underground. And so the ground squirrels create these amazing networks of burrows that are used by many other animals, including Audubon's cottontail rabbit, as well as burrowing owl, which are now a candidate species for being threatened here in California, as well as California tiger salamander.
Joy's well-trained eye helped me see how small things like a squirrel burrow connect to the larger ecosystem and even to the region's water cycle. All of the species living in wetlands and vernal pools help to keep those ecosystems intact. These ecosystems, in turn, help the region survive both floods and droughts.
They are very important for flood attenuation. If you do have wetlands near big waterways, they are places where you can have this buffer that allows water to stand and not impact communities. So I think it's important to recognize the critical role that wetlands play in our communities and our ecosystems for attenuating flood events and providing these buffer zones for flooding, but they're also just amazing critical habitats for plants and animals.
Joy put me in touch with several scientists who are conducting long-term research on the landscapes of the San Joaquin Valley. Dr. Jay Sexton is a professor of life and environmental sciences at UC Merced and an expert in vernal pool plant ecologies. He stressed the importance of caring about and protecting vernal pool habitats, even when they might not look important to the average person.
One thing, getting outside of just the intrinsic value is just sort of understanding the adaptability of life, because these systems are so interesting in terms of the cycles of stress they go through. They go through complete wetting, inundation, in the winter and early spring to complete drying and like earth cracking dry and hot summers, to near freezing in the winter. And you have these plants and animals and other things that thrive in them. And it's just an endless investigation of how do they do it? What are their tricks? What can we learn from them about even how to, some people are even interested about how to cultivate life off Earth, in extreme environments. And so vernal pools are often mentioned in that context, like, we can learn about how to cultivate life on Mars, let's say, if we understand how how things survive in vernal pools.
There is clearly a lot of scientific value not only in vernal pools, but in the wider grassland ecosystems of the San Joaquin Valley as well. One of Dr. Sexton's colleagues is Dr. Matt Hutchinson, a grasslands ecologist.
So I'm Matt Hutchinson. I'm an assistant professor here at UC Merced in the Life and Environmental Sciences Department. And I lead a research group that studies grazing and large herbivores in California and also in Africa.
Dr. Hutchinson is newer to the San Joaquin Valley, having moved to Merced around the same time as me in 2023. Compared to his previous fieldwork in the African nation of Mozambique, he had to get used to a very different type of landscape.
And so I almost have had to retrain myself from an observational perspective to pay attention to those little things. Rather than kind of looking for the big mammals on the horizon, it's what's going on under your feet or around your feet, whether that's pausing over a vernal pool to try and see some fairy shrimp, trying to identify wildflowers, or even in these really open grasslands where there's no trees, you have birds will be nesting on the ground. And so being careful not to stand on a nest. I was out there a year or so ago in the early summer at this time of year when it seems like everything is dying back, and there were these little spots of bright yellow on the landscape, and when you come up to them, it's these little Mariposa lilies that have these bright yellow flowers, a single stalk. They're just kind of like a little beacon on the landscape. So really beautiful, but the coolest thing was you look inside these Mariposa lilies and there's kind of a whole little world going on inside the flower. In this case that I saw, there were 5 or 6 different beetles that seemed to use these flowers as like a mating arena. There were bees in there that were pollinating the flower. Just kind of a good reminder to pay attention to the little stuff, because there can be some really cool things going on around you.
Part of Dr. Hutchinson's job at UC Merced is helping students conduct their own research on grassland ecosystems. One of those students is Alejandro Ramos, a PhD student in quantitative and systems biology. Alejandro grew up in Manteca, a small city toward the northernmost end of the San Joaquin watershed as it makes its final journey out toward the delta.
I remember growing up, going fishing to the San Joaquin River, and then seeing salmon in the river. I remember like that was really cool. You'd be fishing and you see this big salmon just swim by, right? And then during that time, you would see wildlife biologists on the water, doing whatever monitoring they were doing. And as a kid, I remember seeing them and thinking like, wow, like they're out there on the boat working. That's cool. Later on, I would be able to volunteer with, some of those agencies counting salmon. And then eventually in undergrad, I was able to work on a project looking at wetland restoration for salmon.
Alejandro's current research is on mule deer habitat in the San Joaquin Valley as part of Dr. Hutchinson's lab group. Alejandro loves this landscape, and he can't imagine working anywhere else.
It's just such a cool thing, right? It's like this whole full circle part of my life that's been so related to here. And I've gone to like Colorado, done some research over there, done some work with the Park Service over there, and it was beautiful over there also, right? But I think there's nothing like coming back here to this, what feels like home,
Scientists have a lot to appreciate about the wild San Joaquin Valley. It's got ground squirrels and rare wildflowers, vernal pools, and valuable floodplains. I wanted to know what I and other community members like me can do to help protect these natural areas. On this topic, there is no one better to talk to than Zach Wells, the executive director for the East Merced Resource Conservation District. Together with his co-founder, Jeremiah Gregains, Zach started a unique group called the Bear Creek Yacht Club. Bear Creek is a small waterway that flows out of Mariposa County and snakes through the city of Merced, eventually joining the San Joaquin River. Bear Creek isn't exactly the kind of place with yachts. An abundance of garbage, sure, but not yachts.
My name is Zach Wells. I'm here in Merced, California. So the Bear Creek Yacht Club is a collective byproduct of community stakeholders and just care a lot about the community and care a lot about the creek.
Although the name Bear Creek Yacht Club started out as a joke, Zach's group of dedicated cleaners has grown. It's received media attention, youth clubs and service groups have joined in, and it's filling a real need in the community for a cleaner creek and cleaner parks.
We need to protect these waterways. We'd really love to see the return of some of the historic salmon runs that came through Bear Creek originally, that were seen for a lot of some of our community residents in their lifetime, that they remember being able to inner tube down the creek, or there used to be rope swings and all this other stuff. And, that's not really the case anymore. It's so important that we get people in the community behind this and to start continuing to build the support momentum. It's obvious that the community cares about these things, but it's something that we need to continue fighting for.
Zach grew up in Merced and has many fond memories of walking along Bear Creek with his great-grandmother. But like many of his classmates, Zach was eager to move away after high school. He joined the Navy, then studied sports medicine and worked as an athletic trainer and then at the YMCA in Berkeley. He moved back to Merced with his family during the pandemic and began to rediscover the joys of his hometown.
I didn't appreciate or understand, like, even Bear Creek itself. Like, I walked this thing every day. It was just like a path I walked with my grandmother and stuff. But it came when I came back and saw it that I was like, oh no, like, that's not okay. I cared for this thing so much more than I even realized. It was tied to memories and other thing too that was evoked such strong emotion. And there's so many books written about this area and ideas and inspirations of new hope, that whether it was from the gold rush, all that inspiration flowed through our waters, and all that the ancestral and indigenous knowledge that flows and bubbles in those waters. Not everywhere has that. I'm almost choking up a little bit, talking about it. It's our responsibility to uphold these things, and not the Central Valley doesn't always get the attention or the merits it deserves.
I asked Zach what his favorite thing is about Bear Creek besides picking up trash.
My absolute favorite thing is getting in the kayaks and going down the creek in the kayak. There's this section right outside of town, right outside the city limits above McKee. And it is how I imagine maybe things looked when our parents were younger or grandparents were younger. Maybe not how they originally looked, but a little bit closer. It's beautiful. Lots of waterfowl, those silly cormorants, those silly birds. It's a double-crested cormorant, if you aren't familiar. It's my favorite bird. It's the banks are a lot higher in that section of the creek, and so you can't hear lots of the other parts of town. It's very quiet down there. Shaded, it's a little bit cooler. You can still see some of the fish and hear the frogs up there, and reminds me of what it used to be like. And I'm old enough, I guess I can say that now.
About a month after my first trip to Great Valley Grasslands State Park, I had the opportunity to visit again as part of this podcast project to meet with State Park's environmental scientists. Last time, I was mosquito-bitten and underwhelmed. This time, I felt more prepared to appreciate the ecological benefits of the grassland landscape and to keep an eye out for the little things.
My name's Heather Reed. I'm the Natural Resources Program Manager for the Central Valley District.
My name's Colette Bradley. I'm an environmental scientist with the Central Valley District. I work underneath Heather, and I'm with the Cannabis Watershed Protection Program, meaning that we have various restoration projects throughout the district funded by tax money from legal cannabis sales in the state. And so we utilize those funds to then restore areas that previously had grows or potentially may in the future.
Heather and Colette are working on a restoration project that involves cutting through the levee we were standing on. This will allow the San Joaquin River to overflow during the rainy season according to its natural patterns, replenishing the soil and nurturing native species to take root and flourish here.
We're hoping that we're going to restore the natives so that way, if you build it, they will come. Our native thistles are gorgeous. Our native blackberry is a beautiful plant, but it gets outcompeted by Himalayan blackberry. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a really beautiful peace of mind. I love being in nature and just sitting there and enjoying what we have in this state and in this park.
First time I came out to this park, it was dead summer and I was not overwhelmed. It just looked like a big, dense brown monoculture. I started with state parks in June of 2022, and so the first time I saw this park was that summer, and they had just done a prescribed burn of the 220 acres that were reconnecting back to the San Joaquin River. And then when I came that spring to see it just like blossoming back, and to see the vernal pools that are out here, they're very unique vernal pools with alkali-based species. And so it was almost emotionally overwhelming to see it in the spring.
Standing there in Great Valley Grasslands State Park, I felt so lucky to see this landscape in transition. It was hardly an untouched wilderness. Invasive plants were everywhere, and the levee road we walked on blocked the river from its natural course. By the time you listen to this podcast, the floodplain restoration project may be well underway, but it still won't be a perfect landscape. It bears the scars of having been cut off from the river for so long. For generations, these San Joaquin Valley landscapes have been valued primarily for agricultural production. With this mindset, it's easy to dismiss an open grassland like this one as having failed in its purpose, as being nothing but a wasteland. What really came through for me talking to Heather and Colette, as well as Zach and Joy and the UC Merced researchers, was the sense of awe they felt in these landscapes. That sense of humility at examining a ground squirrel burrow, or staring inside a tiny flower, or looking a cormorant in the eye. This landscape is valuable in its own way, and I can't wait to get out there and keep exploring it. We hope you will keep exploring underappreciated landscapes too, whether that means hiking along a river or just watching the birds in your own neighborhood.
This has been Returning to the River, a podcast from California State Parks focused on watershed stories. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share it. To learn more about the people, the places, and the stories featured in this episode, please visit us at parks.ca.gov/returning to the river. This podcast is copyrighted by California State Parks. No part of this podcast may be reproduced or distributed without the written permission of California State Parks, its districts, or divisions. We hope to see you again soon, returning to the river.